What did Jesus mean by "eat my flesh and drink my blood"? Biblical symbolism explained. There are few verses in the Bible that sound as shocking, as disturbing, and as misunderstood as this one. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. For centuries, this passage has unsettled readers. Some interpret it literally, others defend it theologically. Some walk away confused, and many never question it deeply at all. But what if the discomfort was intentional? What if the language was designed to break literal thinking? And what if the real meaning has been hidden not by conspiracy, but by unconscious interpretation? Let's begin where the distortion begins. When modern readers hear "eat my flesh and drink my blood," the mind immediately reacts physically. Flesh is meat, blood is liquid. The image is biological, even violent. It triggers instinctive resistance. And from that reaction, entire doctrines were built to protect the literal reading from appearing absurd. But the ancient world did not think like the modern world. In Hebrew thought, blood did not merely represent fluid. Blood represented life itself. Leviticus makes this explicit. The life is in the blood. To speak of blood was to speak of vitality, essence, animating force. And flesh, sarx in Greek, did not simply mean muscle tissue. It referred to embodied existence, the human condition. Life in material form. So immediately the language shifts. This is not a cannibalistic instruction. It is symbolic language about life and embodiment. But here is where the dystopia begins. When symbolic language is read through literal consciousness, the symbol freezes. It becomes doctrine instead of doorway, ritual instead of revelation. Pause for a moment and consider something else. In the ancient Jewish world, to eat something did not always mean physical consumption. The prophets spoke of eating the scroll. Wisdom literature spoke of tasting understanding. To eat meant to internalize, to absorb, to assimilate. You do not merely look at food, you take it into yourself. It becomes part of you. So what if this passage is not about eating a body, but about internalizing a way of being? Now we reach the first fracture in the literal reading, because in John 6, after this shocking statement, many disciples leave. They say this teaching is hard. Hard because they heard it literally. And what does the text say next? The Spirit gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. The words I have spoken to you are spirit and life. That sentence dismantles the literal interpretation from within. If the flesh counts for nothing, then the command cannot be about physical flesh. The language is spiritual, symbolic, psychological. But what does it mean? Let's go deeper. To eat the flesh is to fully accept embodied existence, to stop fleeing the human condition, to stop pretending spirituality is escape from matter. Throughout history, spiritual distortion often treated the body as inferior, the physical world as fallen, the human condition as something to transcend by denial. But this passage reverses that. It says, participate fully. Do not reject incarnation. Do not divide spirit and body. Ingest this reality. Assimilate it. Now pause and ask yourself something uncomfortable. How often has religion turned symbols into rituals without understanding the inner transformation they point toward? The bread becomes an object. The wine becomes an object. The ceremony becomes sacred. But the internalization becomes optional. The symbol remains. The consciousness remains unchanged. And this is where dystopia quietly takes form. Because when the ritual replaces awareness, form replaces transformation. The bread is eaten, the wine is consumed. But has the life been assimilated? Has the consciousness been integrated? Or has the symbol become frozen? In the Last Supper narrative, bread represents the body. Wine represents blood. Body and blood represent visible form and invisible life. Form and essence, matter and vitality. To eat and drink is to internalize both, to embody the teaching, to allow it to dissolve the boundary between idea and lived reality. This is not magic, it is metaphor. But metaphor is dangerous when misunderstood, because misunderstood metaphor becomes dogma, and dogma becomes division. Throughout history, entire theological wars have been fought over whether the bread literally becomes flesh. Transubstantiation, consubstantiation, symbolism. But what if the argument itself is the evidence of literalism? What if the text was never about molecular transformation? What if it was about psychological transformation? The phrase, "eat my flesh," confronts the ego directly. The ego wants spirituality to remain conceptual, safe, abstract. But this language demands total participation. You cannot admire from distance. You must internalize. To eat is to lose separation. Food becomes you. And here is the deeper symbolic layer. Throughout your channel's exploration, you have examined separation. The illusion of distance between self and reality, between human and divine, between consciousness and existence. In this passage, the boundary dissolves. You are not meant to observe truth from outside. You are meant to assimilate it until it is indistinguishable from your own being. This is not about consuming a person. It is about dissolving distance. But when literal interpretation dominates, distance increases. The divine becomes external. The ritual becomes the bridge. Authority becomes the mediator. The symbol becomes controlled. And once symbols are controlled, institutions gain power. This is not an attack on tradition. It is an observation of psychology. When the inner meaning is forgotten, outer structures multiply, because the mind prefers tangible objects to invisible transformation. And yet the text itself warns us. Do you take offense at this? Offense arises when the mind clings to literal form. When metaphor confronts literalism, discomfort is inevitable. And perhaps that discomfort was the point. Now consider something radical. To drink blood in Jewish law was forbidden. It was taboo. So why use such extreme imagery? Because the shock forces the mind beyond surface interpretation. It demands symbolic depth. It destabilizes complacency. It confronts inherited understanding. This is not gentle teaching. It is disruptive language designed to fracture rigid perception. And here is the final layer. If blood symbolizes life, then drinking it symbolizes participation in life itself. Not avoidance, not suppression, not ascetic escape. Participation, full engagement. To eat the flesh and drink the blood means to accept the human condition as sacred, to embody compassion, vulnerability, mortality, and presence, to stop dividing sacred and secular, to stop separating spirit from matter, to stop imagining that salvation is external. It is internal assimilation. But when interpreted literally, the symbol shrinks. It becomes ritual compliance. And ritual compliance without awareness creates spiritual passivity. The dystopia is subtle. It is not oppression. It is unconscious repetition. It is participating in sacred form without integrating sacred meaning. And so the question is not whether the bread becomes flesh. The question is whether the teaching becomes lived reality. Because assimilation is transformation. Observation is not. The passage is not calling for cannibalism. It is calling for total internalization. Not admiration from distance, not ritual from obligation, but existential participation. And perhaps this is why the language remains shocking. Because true assimilation is uncomfortable. It dissolves identity. It dissolves separation. It dissolves the illusion of control. To eat is to surrender boundary. To drink is to surrender distance. And when distance collapses, the ego trembles. So the next time the phrase echoes, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood," do not ask whether the bread changes. Ask whether you have allowed the symbol to change you. Because the dystopia was never in the verse. It began when metaphor was mistaken for material, when symbol was frozen into doctrine, when inner transformation was replaced by external ritual. The text was never about consuming a body. It was about dissolving separation. It was about embodying consciousness. It was about living the teaching rather than defending the form. And once that is seen, the shock transforms into clarity. The offense transforms into insight. The ritual transforms into reminder. And the symbol becomes alive again, not as object, but as invitation.